everyone, Aaron here for Zolotech, and the iPhone 15 Plus has been out for well over 6 months at this point. A couple weeks ago, I went back and put my SIM card in it. I currently have my eSIM in it, and I tried it out for about 4 to 5 days to see what it was like switching from a 15 Pro Max. So I thought we'd talk about it 6 months later, as this is a phone that many people question, but is still very great in many ways, but seems like it might be a cash grab in other ways. So we'll talk about that in a moment. As far as the overall design and size and weight, well, I really like this design. This year they sort of rounded the edges, and we have aluminum, so it makes it nice and light. And then we have this textured glass on the back, which is rumored for the iPhone 16 Pro models. And this is really great. It has a great texture to it if you're not using a case on it. And then of course it bumps up to the glass here where the camera surround is. So I really like this design. It's very comfortable to hold, still gives grip because of the flat edges, but also feels very familiar. Of course, we have our normal power sleep wake button, we have our millimeter wave antenna, and of course on the bottom we now have USB-C. But one of the things Apple has decided to do is on the Plus and regular model, this is a slower version of USB-C. So for whatever reason, they decided to do that, and that's something I'm not really in support of. They should have given it full speed like they did on the Pro Max phones and the Pro. On the other side, we don't have a SIM card tray in the United States, but we have our volume buttons and our silent switch, and I do miss the action button on the 15 Pro Max, as I typically use this for more of a flashlight function. When I want to use it, press and hold, and then I have the flashlight on the back. That's something that I did miss while I was using it, and something that I wish all of them would have, but I'm sure they will next year. As far as the overall durability, well, being aluminum, it seems to hold up pretty well, but it would dent or scratch pretty easily if you were to drop it, but it seems to have held up well. Now, given the total time I've used this phone is a couple weeks, it's probably not going to be very scratched. But of course, you could put it in a case, but you would be missing the feel of it. But I did put a screen protector on it. You can see that here, and that's something I would highly recommend because the 15 Pro and Pro Max series have been so scratch prone. If we take a look at one, we'll just make sure the screen is off. You can see my Pro Max. I've shown this in other videos, but there's scratches all over it. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's scratches all over the phone, and it's something that is definitely a concern. Even though it's ceramic shield, it doesn't seem to hold up as well. So I highly recommend a screen protector on them. As far as the weight, well, it feels great. It's very light because it's aluminum, and with a screen protector, it does add a little extra weight, but it just feels great to hold on to, and it's definitely one of my favorite designs we've had in a long time. When it comes to battery life, well, that's where many people might want the Plus phone over the Pro phone. What I mean by that is it has a fairly large battery, but if we go into our settings, we'll go down to battery health, and you'll see I've only had 11 cycles. Like I said, I used it for about a couple weeks total, and I'm at 100% capacity. If we take a look at my battery life over that time, the last day I used it full time, I had 3 hours and 9 minutes of screen active time or screen on time, 1 hour and 56 minutes of screen off time, but didn't even use 50% of my battery. I also saved a screenshot of it, and as you can see, it had 1 hour and 57 minutes of screen on time and 1 hour and 45 minutes of screen off time, and I used only about 25% of the battery. Typically, by the end of the day, I would have about 50% or more left. This had phenomenal battery life. There's a few reasons for that, such as its display, but I charged it the same way every single night. MagSafe charger. If I was in the car, I charged it, but typically it was put on a charger at night. I'd take it off in the morning, and I was good to go for the entire day until the following morning before I went to bed. As far as the display, well, it looks great. It's just as bright as the 15 Pro Max, but it does have a couple downsides. I'm sure the one you're most familiar with is it doesn't have ProMotion, and the first couple of days you definitely notice it. So as you're scrolling through, it's nowhere near as smooth as what we have on the Pro phones. So if I bring in the Pro phone, we go to the same screen, and we just scroll from top to bottom. You'll see here that you can see the smoothness difference on both of them. So even under slow motion, you can see the difference. It's definitely noticeable. And there's micro stutters throughout. Now that could be part of the operating system, but going into things like weather, you saw there, swipe home, it seems like it's sort of stuttering. That might be just because I'm used to the 120 Hertz ProMotion, or it's just the way this phone is. So scrolling through, you definitely notice the slowness there, and it's really inexcusable for the price of the phone. However, without 120 hertz, you do save a lot of battery. So that's one of the positives of it. And I know people that have even turned it off on the Pro Max phone to save battery. So if you want the ultimate battery savings, of course, turn off ProMotion. But for the price of this phone, it's really inexcusable. You should let people choose. If this was less than $500 or $400, it'd be fine. But at the price of this phone, I just don't think it's okay. When it comes to the overall display itself, though, it looks great from every angle. In the sun, it's great, and just basically the same as what we have now, with the exception of PWM. I've talked about this before, where it adjusts brightness by flashing the display faster and slower, and I definitely noticed this as an issue for me while I was using it. In fact, it made me feel a little dizzy, a little nauseous at times, and that's pretty typical about people that experience issues with PWM. So about 1 in 10 people experience that, including myself, where it can cause excess eye strain and much more. So you can see it side by side at 240 frames per second, and you can definitely tell the difference. But that's one of the downsides. If that doesn't bother you, the display is great. Super bright in sunlight, 2000 nits, and much more. With the display, of course, this year we get the dynamic island, and that's something I really like, but I wouldn't say it's a reason to go and run out and buy the phone. Apple has been adding things to it slowly. You've got music, of course, that you can just swipe into the dynamic island, press and hold, and pops it back open, or you can just swipe it off the screen altogether if you don't want it there, or bring it back. Of course, you can put multiple things there, but I think they haven't really added enough to this that I'd like to see, where maybe they could have this with every single app that we have, maybe weather or something else, where you might want it in the dynamic island. We haven't seen that just yet. But again, I wouldn't run out and buy an iPhone because it has the dynamic island. I think it's a nice feature, but it's not enough for me to run out and purchase one over just having the notch. Now, as far as the cameras go, well, they're pretty good. In fact, if you haven't noticed already, let me go into the camera here, spin it around, and we're recording with an iPhone 15. So that's a 15 4K 60 HDR. It's recording like that. If I record back, now I'm recording with the forward-facing camera of the 15 Plus, and it gives you an idea of what it looks like and sounds like. So these are great cameras overall with autofocus, and definitely can be used for YouTube like I'm using here. So not just for that, but for photos. And they also have a pretty close minimal focus distance. If I bring it up and close, you'll see I can get very close before it gets a little fuzzy and goes out of focus. Not as close as previous versions because of the lack of a 48 megapixel camera, but it's fine for most things and you can zoom in. Of course, the cameras aren't using ProMotion, you're lacking features such as macro, and those may or may not matter to you, but for the most part, it's a great phone, and you can see it here as I get close. The lenses and everything looks pretty good overall, and the camera does a great job. So definitely worth checking out if you're looking for a good camera, but you don't have to have necessarily the best. It does a great job, minus that you don't have the telephoto lens. When it comes to the speakers, they've held up pretty well. Now, considering this hasn't been used greatly, it's fine, but we have a little speaker at the top, one at the bottom. Let's go ahead and take a listen. The speakers sound pretty good overall, but were definitely a little distorted at the highest volumes. They may not be as good as the 15 Pro and Pro Max, though, as well at the high volumes, but they went plenty loud, over 84 decibels or so, and they sound okay. I wouldn't say they sound phenomenal, but they'll definitely get the job done. As far as performance, well, minus the little micro stutters throughout, things like Minecraft seem to load just fine. I haven't loaded this in a while, but let's go ahead and load it, see how long it takes. Games load fine because of the processor, but if we go in and play, create new, you can see maybe some of the little stuttering or frame rate drops throughout. So that could be a processor optimization they need to do with the latest version of iOS. We're currently running a beta as well, so let's give it just a moment to load, but I'll show you in real time, and it's still taking a little bit of time here. So again, we'll give it just a moment. It's still loading. And again, first time I've gone into it in some time. So there we go, it's loaded and we're in. So frame rates while you're playing this should be fine, up to 60 hertz or 60 frames per second. Overall, it's going to look okay, but it's just not going to be phenomenally fast or play those triple A-rated games or what we had with Resident Evil and things on the App Store. You just can't actually use those. They're not an option. So if we go in and type Resident Evil, you'll see we don't have the option to actually install those. Even if we go in here, we don't have the option to get because it's not available on this device. You need one of the newer processors. So if we go to Geekbench, you'll see that we have 6 gigabytes of RAM, and we're running 17.5 beta 2, but with the A16 Bionic. So with that processor, it's fast, but not fast enough to play those AAA games. So it's lacking there a little bit. Of course, it still has crash detection. I've talked about in the past where I've actually unfortunately had to use that, and it sensed that on my Apple Watch, but it would work on here, so it's nice to have. And then of course, emergency SOS via satellite. We have those options as well. Now, overall connectivity, well, I do have it connected to Wi-Fi. Let's disconnect here. Give it a moment. I have my SIM card in it, my eSIM, and we've got 5G. So let's see what kind of speeds we get. It seems to be pretty good, but they're not going to be as fast as what we have with the 15 Pro or Pro Max. Go ahead and hit go and see what we get here outside. As the test is running, you can see I had 80.3 megabits per second down, 5.72 megabits per second up. It's not unbelievable, but for having 1 to 2 bars, it's pretty good overall, and I really haven't had any complaints with it. 5G seems to be plenty fast. As far as iOS goes, well, iOS updates we should have for years on this, at least about 4 to 5 more, maybe longer with security updates. Currently, like I said, we're on iOS 17.5 betas, but we should be able to use betas, use public versions, at least for about 5 years or more. So maybe iOS 23, iOS 25 possibly with security updates. So it's very future-proof that way. As far as daily use, well, I really enjoyed using this overall. I didn't find that it was too slow, but I definitely noticed the stutters from time to time when going into different apps, maybe going into the clock or going into weather. You'll notice the little bit slower display if you're coming from ProMotion. That wears off after a couple days, but using it regularly is just a really great experience overall. I really had no complaints. I had no issues seeing the display most of the time, but I did think that it dipped the display brightness down sometimes, where I couldn't see it as well as I could my 15 Pro Max, even in the brightest of situations, even though they're technically the same brightness. So I did see that from time to time. As far as the overall heat of the device, well, it does warm up quite a bit from time to time. It does seem to dissipate that heat nicely. It gets warm on the sides where it is currently completely normal, but it's warm on the back just running those speed tests and things like that that I've shown you in the video with Minecraft and more. But you could definitely play any game that's available other than the ones specific for the A17 Pro. When it comes to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, really no issues there. It connects to Wi-Fi fine as long as you have a good router. Bluetooth, I haven't had issues with connectivity with things such as AirPods. So the AirPods seem to connect, work fine, and don't disconnect. You'll see there we go, they're connected. No issues there. They work fine as you would expect. And overall, it's a pretty good experience. I never had to worry about getting through the day with the overall battery. Now, if you're wondering if you should buy it, well, I would caution you at this point that if you want the best battery life and that's what you care about most, then definitely if you can get a discount. I've seen on different websites where with a trade-in, they'll give you one of these for free. If you care most about the overall battery life, this is the phone to get because of that. If battery life doesn't matter to you and you want the best of the best, well, I'd get the 15 Pro Max or wait for next year's iPhone 16 Pro or 16 Pro Max. They're going to discount this phone typically or maybe get rid of it, but it should have support for many, many years. So I would maybe wait for this, but if you could get it for free, it's a really great phone that's very underrated because of its lack of 120 hertz. Everything else about it is great. And the rumor is next year with the iPhone 16 Plus, they're actually going to get rid of the massive battery and shrink it down a little bit. Now, I don't know if that's a good move, if that's accurate, but that seems odd that you would want to do that with one of your best battery life phones. But reception, everything else seemed to work great for me. So I recommend it if you can get a good deal on it. Otherwise, I would go for the Pro phones and get all the additional features with the telephoto camera and more. Let me know your experience so far with the iPhone 14 Plus or 15 Plus, or maybe let me know what you're using in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.